Hello everyone. So, The Fate of Atlantis just had its final episode, which concludes the DLC story, and now, since the DLC is done, I'm gonna review it, because I like that? But yeah, who knows, maybe while I'm writing this I'll learn to appreciate Odyssey more for its merits and such. So, let's begin. Now, The Fate of Atlantis is comprised of 3 episodes, which each released a few weeks apart, and to begin I'll summarize each episode and then go over the DLC in its entirety at the end. So, first up is the first episode of the DLC, The Fields of Elysium. Now, The Fields of Elysium released a while back, and to describe it in one word, I would say it was underwhelming, as despite being hopeful at first, given the fact that when I started playing it, early on it felt like things were actually going with places in the story, and this feeling did eventually fade away when the story failed to deliver on anything it was building, instead opting to give either unsatisfying ends to its smaller stories or just on the main story have a cliffhanger ending. But if you could overlook the story, then there's still more that this DLC has to offer, though most of it isn't good. The DLC has many nasty little habits, probably the biggest one being artificially extending its length by placing most of its objectives on top of tall rock formations which have only one teleporter to the top, meaning you either go all the way around a city-sized boulder or climb a few meters straight up. I mean, actually a few hundred. And this is quite tedious, because you do it a lot. And even then, once you're up there, the view isn't very nice to look at. Moving on to the second episode, there were some definite improvements, in my opinion at least. The landscape felt less designed to slow the player down, and the story didn't feel like it overstayed its welcome, though this was less of a story this time and more of a glorified boss crawl with some guest appearances from dead characters from the main game. And even though playtime wasn't artificially extended using the world design this time, it was still somewhat extended in the form of a series of what were just essentially fetch quests that led to acquiring an armor that was essential to completing the game, as some areas are locked without it, which, needless to say, isn't great. Now on to the final episode, which I do believe was the best of the 3, as it finally managed to find a sort of balance between build-up and payoff in its story, and even managed to somewhat surpass my expectations, though it did take about 100 hours of Odyssey, lowering them for that to actually happen. The story does manage to build on some plot lines that culminate in a final reveal that wasn't blatantly obvious, but still made sense in the end. But even then, there's still the issue of the artificial length introduced, in the form of Isu knowledge this time, and then there's even a new issue that seems to have appeared in this last episode, that being the reuse of environments and assets. For example, the Keeper's insights are being held in, at least when I played it, it seemed like they were near identical locations, all the way down to the guard pattern, which only makes the DLC feel more grindy and tedious, because you need Isu knowledge to finish the quests. And Keeper's insights are one of the biggest sources of that, so you're probably going to go do them, and it just, gets boring. Now, on the whole, The Fate of Atlantis, in my opinion, was an improvement over its predecessor, as it did things like add new areas rather than retreading old ones that weren't visited very much, and it also added more new gear, but that's not really enough to save it from its downfalls, like its artificially increased length, and the fact that its episode felt mostly unrelated to each other, as they all do take place in very different settings with self-contained narratives that only seemed really held together by a fairly basic overarching narrative. But the one place where the story really shines, in my opinion, is the modern day elements, because they have finally brought us to a new milestone for Assassin's Creed, as before now, the worst that AC has ever really gotten is just bad enough to be forgettable, but not bad enough to be, genuinely amusing. But now, finally, with the modern day story in this DLC, Assassin's Creed has finally, in my opinion, I know, and this is only in my opinion, reached the point of being laughably bad. But then again, this is all just my opinion, and if you do disagree, feel free to express that in the comments. But if you enjoyed, also express that in the comments, and like, share, subscribe for more content like this. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.